This morning I'm beginning a series on relationships that'll likely go for several months. We're going to talk about friendship, dating, marriage, parenting. We'll talk about how our relationship with God affects all of those relationships. We'll talk about the fact that how we perceive ourselves, who we are, affects every one of those relationships. The first three of these messages will deal with who we are. Who we are is one of the most, if not the most important ingredient in every one of your relationships. Why? Because we see the world as we are, not as it is. Who we are determines what we actually hear when people talk. They can be saying something and we can be hearing something very different. I'll talk about that more as the series goes on. Who we are determines how we see life. It's how we see God. It's how we see other people. Who we are determines who we will be in relationships with. Studies show that memory isn't always productive. You remember what happened. It's often reconstructive. Based on who you are, you reconstruct the details of what you went through. And now when you tell the story, it's a very different story or some different from what it actually was. The health of any relationship is determined by the health of the two people in it. So two healthy people can have a real healthy relationship. Two unhealthy people have no chance of having a healthy relationship. One healthy and one not healthy can get down the road a little bit, but not where they need to be. Two last statements before we get in the outline. Spiritual maturity requires emotional maturity. Spiritual maturity is not knowing the Bible. Probably all of us know somebody who knew the Bible, could quote it back and forth, but they were a mess. It requires emotional maturity. So we're going to be talking about that all through this. Lastly, none of us are completely emotionally healthy. Not a one of us. We're all on a spectrum. I'm light years ahead of where I used to be, where I came from, but I won't be finally and absolutely whole until heaven. I will still deal with issues. We're all broken. We're just broken in different places and to different degrees. We're living in a broken world with other broken people. We're made for perfect, for Eden in heaven, but we live in a world where no person is perfect and no thing is perfect. I'll say this twice. Until heaven, we're all making the best of less than all we want. Until heaven, we're all making the best of less than all we want. We're made for and we long for perfect, but we're all managing or mismanaging imperfect lives and imperfect relationships. Now turn your Bible to Ecclesiastes chapter 2. Ecclesiastes chapter 2. If you don't know where that is, go to Psalms, open the middle of your Bible, you should hit Psalms, hang it right. We're going to read verses 1 to 11. Solomon, the son of David, was once the wisest man in the world, but he got away from the Lord and he became a cynic. He was cynical. In Ecclesiastes, God uses this now cynic to tell us the truth about life. He does it in a cynical way, but everything he's telling us is true. Ecclesiastes 2, 1 to 11. Don't miss all of the for myselfs that we read in this. Verse 1. I said to myself, come now, and I will test you with pleasure. So enjoy yourself. And behold, it too was futility. I said of laughter, it is madness, and of pleasure, what does it accomplish? I explored with my mind how to stimulate my body with wine, while my mind was guiding me wisely, and how to take hold of folly, until I could see what good there is for the sons of men to do under heaven the few years of our lives. I enlarged my works. I built houses, plural, for myself. I planted vineyards for myself. I made gardens and parks for myself. I planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made ponds and water for myself, from which to irrigate a forest of growing trees. I bought male and female slaves, and I had newborn slaves. I also possessed flocks and herds larger than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. Also, I collected for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings and provinces. I provided for myself male and female singers, and the pleasures of men, many concubines. Then I became great and increased more than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. My wisdom also stood beside me. Watch this next verse. All that my eyes desired, I did not refuse them. There's not one thing I wanted that I didn't get. That's what he's telling us. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart was pleased because of all my labor, and this was my reward for all my labor. Verse 11, thus I considered all the activities which my hands had done and the labor which I had exerted. I considered all these things I did, all this stuff I had, and he ends by saying, and behold, all was vanity and striving after the wind. There was no profit under the sun. In other words, it didn't do it for me. Now, in verse 11, Solomon used this phrase, under the sun. He uses it throughout the book of Ecclesiastes. He's referring to life without God and where God's will isn't done. What I want you to see today is if you have Jesus, if you really know him and you really walk with him, then you and others can have relationships that are okay to good, and some even maybe great. But if you don't know Jesus and you don't really walk with him, you'll never have a relationship or anything that'll be enough. In Western culture, we think like this: get good grades in high school so you'll get into a good college, so you'll get a good job, so you'll make good money, then you can have the good life. Right? That's what we do. We think that'll do it for us. The majority of people who live in America equate having a good life with having plenty of money. Solomon was the richest man of his day. In and for his time, we would say he had it all. Turns out, though, that having everything he wanted wasn't enough. So I'm calling this message, Why It All Isn't Enough. Look in your outline. Here's things we learned from Solomon. I think I'm giving you 6. Number 1, it's easier to start than finish. It's easier to start than finish. You young people, listen up. Like many do today, and several did in the Bible, Solomon started well, but he ended poorly. He walked with God and gave us the Proverbs as a younger man. But then he fell away from God and became cynical. God still used him to write this book in his cynicism. It's one thing to say what you're going to do. It's another thing to do what you said you would do. Say it again. It's easy to say, well, I'm going to do this. I'm going to be this someday. I'll always love the Lord. It's another thing to actually have done it. The boast of youth is not the same as actual experience. The first thinks and claims he'll do something and be someone. The second actually did something and became someone. I love this verse, 1 Kings 20, verse 11. Let not him who girds on his armor boast like him who takes it off. The guy girding it on thinks he's going to win. The guy taking it off did. Now, I'm not physically what I used to be. I know that's a shock to you. But I could still sign up for and start a marathon. Now, I'd drop out the first crystal I passed, so I wouldn't go far. The Christian life is a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's not enough to begin well. You got to finish well. And the finishing's a lot harder than the beginning. Number 2, smart people can make really bad choices. Smart people can make really bad choices. As a young man, Solomon became the wisest man in the world, but even the smartest people can make bad decisions. The fact that you've made good decisions in the past is no guarantee that the next one's going to be another good one. Arguably, the most intelligent president we ever had was Jimmy Carter. He was a nuclear physicist or something, but he was one of the worst presidents we ever had. History kind of records. Look at what it says in 1 Kings 11:4. When Solomon was old, his wives turned his heart away after other gods. His heart was not wholly devoted to the Lord his God. When Solomon walked with the Lord, he warned us against bad women. He does it about 4 different times in the Proverbs. We think that if we had what he had, we would have everything we wanted, but we don't. So Solomon later on marries and obtains all these women. We'll give you the number here in a minute. People who make all these bad women. So people who make good decisions can come to a point and make really bad ones, which is what Solomon did. Now here's the third thing. Solomon had it all, and even it all wasn't enough. He had it all, and it wasn't enough. We know that Solomon had it all because he tells us what he had. And then we think if we had it all, if we had what he had, we would have everything we wanted. But we wouldn't, and he didn't. He tells us 10 things that he had that nearly everyone thinks if I had those 10 things, I would be maybe the happiest man on the planet or girl. Here's what he had. Number one, he had entertainers. He had entertainers. The implication in verse 2 is that Solomon had the Henry Cho's and the Jeff Foxworthys of his day on retainer. And anytime he wanted to, he could bring them in and they could make him laugh and humor him. But it didn't fill the hole in his soul. Look what he wrote earlier, Proverbs 14:13. Even in laughter, the heart may be in pain, and the end of joy may be grief. Surrounding yourself with funny people can make you feel good, but it can't fill the hole in your soul. Then in verse 8, Solomon tells us he had singers. He could snap his fingers and have the best singers in the land perform for him anytime he wanted. But even though he surrounded himself with all these entertainers, his soul was still empty. Number two, he stimulated himself with wine. He stimulated himself with wine. Verse 3. Wine in the Bible isn't always alcoholic. It can mean anything from the just squeezed juice from a grape to something that's been made alcoholic, which you do with leaven. If you remember, Jesus always tells us, get the leaven out. That's why. But here it implies that what Solomon's drinking is alcoholic. Alcohol is usually used for one of two reasons: to feel good or to numb or distract you when you feel bad. To feel good or to numb and distract you when you feel bad. Frankly, it seeks from a bottle what we're supposed to get from God. Either way, it wasn't a good idea, and it didn't solve Solomon's problem. Alcohol doesn't solve problems. Often it produces new ones. Look at what Solomon penned in his more sober-minded days. Proverbs 23:31 and 32. Do not look on the wine when it is red, when it sparkles in the cup, when it goes down smoothly. At the last it bites like a serpent and stings like a viper. Solomon couldn't drink away his problem. Number three, Solomon built houses for himself. He built houses for himself. Verse 4 tells us that he built houses. Don't miss the S, it's plural. He doesn't tell us how many, just at least two. As you recall, Solomon built Israel's first temple. The original temple is called Solomon's Temple, if you're reading history. In 1 Kings 6:37 to 38, it tells us that it took 7 years to build the temple, God's house. We learn in 1 Kings 7:1 that it took Solomon, you ready for this, 13 years to build his house. 13 years to build his house. Now, for perspective, it only took 6 years to build Biltmore. Wrap your brain around that. If we could just build our dream home, if we could have a house in the mountains or on the beach, Solomon tells the truth, it wouldn't be enough. It wouldn't be enough. You can always fantasize that this next thing will be enough until you have it. You can always live under the illusion, if I was just married or single or had a kid or these kids were gone or had more money or a different job, better pastor, whatever, then I'd be enough. No. Solomon tells the truth here. He knows. He's been there. He's done that. He's got the t-shirt. Write this down somewhere. If I can't be content with what I have, I won't be content with what I want. If I can't be content with what I have, I won't be content with what I want. Contentment is not an emotion that comes over us. It's something we learn and choose. Paul talks about that in Philippians 4. Solomon's extravagant homes didn't do for him what he needed done. Number 4, Solomon built himself a business. He built himself a business. Verse 4 tells us he planted vineyards. Verse 7 says that he, quote, possessed flocks and herds larger than all who preceded him in Jerusalem. A lot of people think, if I just had my own business, that'd be the greatest. Write this down somewhere. If I can't be content where I am, I won't be content where I want to go. If I can't be content where I am, I won't be content where I want to go. Because here's the problem. Wherever I go, there I am. Wherever I go, there I am. And we're talking about who we are in these messages. Solomon's entrepreneurial success didn't fill the hole in his soul. It won't fill yours either. Number 5, he built himself a legacy. He built himself a legacy. Verses 5 and 6 tell Solomon built gardens and parks with ponds and forests for himself. He made a name for himself by creating a legacy. In addition to his parks and gardens, both plural, 2 Chronicles 7:11 tells us he finished the house of the Lord. So his legacy was, I built the temple, God's house. I built all these parks. And boy, that'll make a name for me, won't it? Well, it will, but it won't be enough. Number 6, Solomon commanded people. He commanded people. A lot of people fantasize about being the boss. Boy, if I was a boss, if I could tell people what to do and they'd do it, for me, that would be the bomb diggity. We're told in verse 7 that he owned generations of slaves. This was in addition to commanding Israel's army. And you know what? It wasn't enough. Number 7, he accumulated wealth. He accumulated wealth. Verse 8, Solomon tells us about his riches, silver, gold, and the treasure of kings. His wealth and glory were known far beyond Israel's borders. The Queen of Sheba traveled to Jerusalem to see it for herself. She had heard so much, she just had to see it for herself. Her conclusions in 1 Kings 10:7, the half was not told me. You exceed in prosperity the report which I heard. So Solomon's riches and glory were at least twice as magnificent as this woman had heard. And what she had heard, she couldn't afford to miss. But cash and stuff, silver and gold, cannot fill a hole in a man's soul. It just can't. Now, not only did he accumulate wealth, number 8, he accumulated women. He accumulated women. Verse 8 tells us he collected women for his own personal pleasure. We're told the number of women in Solomon's collection in 1 Kings 11:3. Look at this. He had 700 wives, princesses, we don't know how many princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned his heart away from the Lord. Solomon's homes, however many there were, how many homes you got to have for 1,000 plus women? His homes were today's Playboy mansions, and all of the 1,000 plus bunnies were his. Shallow, sinful man might think that if they could just have the woman they want or all the women they want, that would just be the greatest thing imaginable. But it's not. Solomon had all that. He called it vanity. It's futility. It's worthless. Listen real closely to the truth I'm about to tell you. Sin always promises more than it can deliver. It always promises more than it can deliver. Its rewards become hollow. They become hollow. It promises freedom, but puts you in bondage. It promises pleasure, but leaves you hungover with guilt and shame. I'll say this one twice. Sin promises to fill you up, but leaves you more empty than you were before you sinned. Sin promises to fill you up, but leaves you more empty than you were before you sinned. So you depress, so you drink, so you sober up, and now you feel worse than you did before the whole cycle started. You think having an affair will do it for you, so you do it, and it does it for you for a while. We'll talk about that in a minute. But then eventually it doesn't do it for you, and it leaves your soul more depressed and needy than before the affair. Sin promises to fill you up, but it leaves you more empty than you were before you sinned. Too many people in this room can confirm exactly what I just said. Solomon had over 1,000 women at his beck and call. Not one of them individually, nor all of them collectively, could give Solomon what his soul so desperately longed for. Write this down somewhere. If I can't be content with who I'm with, it's unlikely that I'll be content with the one I think I want. If I can't be content with who I'm with, it's unlikely that I'll be content with the one I think I want. All kinds of people have done this, gotten into marriage. Oh, it did it for them. The infatuation was wonderful. We're in love. And so they get married. But eventually the infatuation wears off and they don't know what to do about it. They probably think that love is infatuation, and it's not. And all of a sudden they realize this man or this woman isn't doing it for them. There's something they're longing for this person's not giving them. And so the devil says, you know what? Somebody else can do that for you, just not him, just not her. And so you leave a marriage that was perfectly good, just not all you fantasized it to be, and get in the second marriage, which may be worse than the first one, or even if it's pretty good, you find out eventually it's no different than the other. I got a guy that I started playing tennis with after I went off seminary, became number one player in the state. And he married this girl. She's a Delta airline agent. And they were married for a certain amount of time. Then he wanted to divorce her. I wrote him, I think it was a 6-page letter telling him not to do it. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to divorce her. You're going to find somebody else. You're going to marry her. And then eventually that new marriage is going to be just like that old marriage. So he did what most people do when I give him advice. He blew me off. Okay? He remarried, still married to that girl today. But about 5 years later, he wrote me a letter and told me everything I told him was exactly the truth. A lot of second marriages are better because the people learn how to manage the imperfection of it. It's not a better marriage. And they should have kept the first one. If you think that some boy or girl or man or woman is going to fill the hole in your soul, you're going to be deeply disappointed. They cannot. They're not supposed to. Don't miss that all these things that Solomon thought would fill the hole in his soul kept him from the only one who could. Say that again. Solomon, all these things that he thought would fill his soul kept him from the one who could, which was the Lord he had walked away from. And they'll do the same for you. Number 9, Solomon was powerful. Today, this day, Donald Trump is the most powerful man in the world. That has to be quite the hit to the ego, wouldn't you think? Solomon was that man in his day. The most powerful man in the world. Boy, that'd do it for you, wouldn't it? Well, it turns out it wouldn't. In Ecclesiastes 2:9, Solomon says, I became great and increased more than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. But it wasn't enough. Why? Because we're not created to have power. We're created to have a relationship with God and reflect who He is. That done well will satisfy the soul. It'll make relationships okay, if not good or great. That done poorly leaves you with an unsatisfied soul that will rob you in every relationship in your life. We'll be talking about that over these weeks. Power can't do it for you. Here's the 10th thing. He denied himself no pleasure. This sums up all Solomon's told us about having it all. In Ecclesiastes 2:10, all that my eyes desired, I did not refuse them. Not one single thing. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure. In the Hebrew, the word any means any. He had everything. He had every person he wanted. And it wasn't enough. He wanted more. He needed more. People who don't have what they want can fantasize about having what they want, but don't have at the moment. They can think, if I just had him, if I just had her, if I was just married, if I just had this amount of money, if I just had whatever, then life would be good. I'd be okay. Solomon's telling us it's a lie. It's a lie. If they ever attain to that person or thing, they'll, like Solomon, discover he or she or it won't do it for them. It's easier to start than finish. Smart people can make really bad decisions. Solomon had it all, but even it all wasn't enough. Number 4. People and things can be enough until they aren't. People and things can be enough until they aren't. After telling us about everything he had, Solomon tells us that it wasn't enough. Ecclesiastes 2, 10, and 11 again. My heart was pleased because of all the labor, and this was my reward for all my labor. In other words, you think, I worked hard, I deserve all this. Well, you didn't work that hard. Your dad was the king, okay? You fell into this job. I considered all my activities which my hands had done and the labor which I had exerted, and behold, it was vanity, striving after the wind, and there was no profit under the sun. So in verse 10, Solomon tells us, watch this, that all of these things did it for him for a while. His heart was pleased with his reward. They all did it for him for a while, and then they didn't. Every one of Solomon's things might do it for you for a while. They work until they don't, and they eventually don't. We fall into infatuation with someone and call it love. Even if we do love that person, the infatuation, the buzz it gives us, eventually diminishes. The new is a thrill, but sooner or later becomes old or common, and we lose the buzz. A person gets drunk to drown his sorrows, but sobers up later only to realize that his problems are all still there. In the same way, the thing we thought we wanted, be that escaping with entertainment, alcohol, or drugs, be that having houses, businesses, legacies, wealth, power, be that the pursuit of pleasure, eventually they no longer do it for us. The feeling that those things might give us all leak. They leak. They really do it for us until they don't. And they always eventually don't. People and things can be enough until they aren't. And when we're back to facing our empty soul as we seek to manage a life that is so much less than what we long for. And let me add this. The more you try to fill the hole in your soul with anything other than knowing God and doing His will, the bigger the hole in your soul becomes. The more you try to fill the hole in your soul with people and things, experiences, eventually they don't do it for you, and the bigger the hole in your soul becomes. Number 5. What we all long for and look for is the life that only Jesus can give us. What we all long for and look for is the life that only Jesus can give us. Now, how do I know that's true? Because the Bible tells me so. What we're all longing for is what we were created to have, Eden and heaven, and who we were created to be. We were supposed to be with God, and we were supposed to be like God. Our souls long to be who God creates to be. Our souls long for what the Bible calls life. Now look at what Jesus tells us about this. In John 6:53 he says, you have no life in yourselves. What you want, what you desperately need is life, but you don't have it. People and things can't give it to us. But Jesus has what we need. John 1:4, in Him, in Jesus, was life. Jesus not only has what we want and need, Jesus came to give us what we want and need. John 10:10, I came to may have life and have it abundantly. In Ecclesiastes, Solomon tells us the observable truth about life in this world under the sun. Having gotten away from God, he became cynical, but in the end, he returns to what he once knew to be true. So he concludes the book by saying in Ecclesiastes 12:13 and 14, the conclusion, when all has been heard, is fear God and keep His commandments, because this applies to every person. For God will bring every act of judgment, everything which is hidden, whether it is good or evil. Having it all, Solomon concluded that having it all wasn't enough. Only God Himself can fill what is empty in us. which brings us to my last point, number 6. If you don't become enough in Him, no person or thing will ever be enough. If you don't become enough in Him, no person or thing will ever be enough. Who wouldn't be happy as he or she possibly could be if they had all the entertainment they wanted, homes, all the homes they wanted, were famous and would never be forgotten because of their legacy, had power to get and have whatever they wanted, had more money than they do what to do with, and had the person or people of their dreams? Who wouldn't be happy with that? Me. And you. Oh, we would for a while. But eventually they wouldn't do it for us. And we'd need some new hit, some new buzz, some new infatuation, something we don't have now, thinking the next one will finally do it for us. And if it's not God, it won't. It just won't. The only thing that'll make you enough is if you know God well and are becoming who He made you to be. Remember that all these things did it for Solomon until they didn't. And all of them will do it for you until they won't. Oh, you wish you could date somebody. Well, if I could date somebody, I would be somebody. And then you start dating. You find somebody, start dating somebody. I'm telling you, it leaks. What you feel leaks. And you think, oh, if we get married, that'll do it for us. We're going to get married. Oh, it's exciting. She has a big day. She's queen for the day, got her dress and all that. He just shows up and follows orders. And they get married. And all this is, we go on the honeymoon. Oh, this is wonderful. Let me tell you something, guys. It leaks. In a year, it isn't going to feel like it did then. And in 5, it's not. And in 10, it's not. What are we going to do with that? And then think, oh, if we can just have a home, if we can just buy our own home or build our own home. And they do that. And it's just wonderful when they move in. But it leaks. And then think, if we could have kids, we could really be happy. Now, obviously, they've never had kids, right? We can really be happy. And they get kids. Oh, the kids are wonderful. Until they aren't. And some of them may grow up to make you regret the day you had them. And you'll have to deal with that. It may or may not be your fault. That's the reality of it. Oh, if I just had this job, if I had that career, if we had that kind of money in the bank or in retirement, it all leaks. It'll do it for you for a while. But then you find yourself in a good marriage with a good job, living in a nice home, longing for so much more than they can give you. Write this down somewhere. The best marriage will not be enough. I ought to know. I think I have one. But my heart longs for more than Betsy could ever give me. My heart longs for what it was made for. That's Him. If I don't figure that out, you know what will happen? And this is what many of you will do, and you'll divorce because of it. You'll think, one, that the problem, that you feeling empty, is your mate not doing it for you. And you'll throw away a good man or a good woman when the problem is your own heart. Because eventually that good man or that woman won't be able to do it for you. The infatuation will leak. And you'll either have to learn how to really love somebody or you'll get out. Look at what it says in Jeremiah 2:13. My people have committed 2 evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, the gusher, the fire hydrant, to hew for themselves cisterns, broken cisterns that can hold no water. Now, in case you don't know, a cistern is not a female version of a brethren, okay? That's not what that is. A cistern is something that holds water. In these cases, they were huge rocks in the ground. If you ever go to Israel, which maybe you'll never do again, up in Masada, which is this mountain fortress, they've got these huge cisterns that Herod the Great built up there. And he channeled water out of Jerusalem. It's really a magnificent construction idea and thing that he pulled off. And all that water would go in there and fill those cisterns up at the top of this mountain. It's crazy. If you ever go to the Caribbean, you'll see houses with these tanks on top of them. They're cisterns. They're holding water. Everything Solomon did, listen closely, held water for a while until he didn't. Every one of them. Every new house was great. Every new girl was great. Every new park was great. Every new pond was beautiful. They all did it for him for a while until they didn't. He filled his cistern with one thing until it no longer did it for him. And then he filled it with another thing. And then it didn't do it for him. And then he filled it with another and another and another and another, and they all leaked. What could be more maddening? Think about this. What could be more maddening than having everything you think you could possibly want and discover it's not enough? It almost make you suicidal, wouldn't it? I have everything I could possibly have imagined wanting. Why am I so empty inside? If anybody on planet Earth ought to be full, shouldn't it be me? And yet in my darkest moments, in my quiet moments, I realize I'm as empty can be. You know why we always have noise going, screens, music, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Like these people walk around with bugs in their ear. You know why I always do that? Because we don't like to be quiet, because when we're quiet, we hear our soul, and we don't like what it says. In the quiet, we realize how empty we are. So we need to call a friend. We need to play a game. We need to play a video game. We need to look at our social media. Most of you never, ever are just quiet. And the big reason is because when we're quiet, we hear our souls. And we don't like what they say. You got to learn to be comfortable with yourself and with God if you're ever going to really be comfortable with somebody else. All these things lead. Solomon came to realize that everything he had was striving after the wind. It was all vanity. It could not fill his soul. A wise man is not somebody who learns from the mistakes of others. Okay? If you don't learn learns from your own mistakes, I'm sorry. A wise man is not somebody who learns from his own mistakes. If you don't learn from your own mistakes, that makes you an idiot, okay? You're just an idiot. A wise man learns from other people's mistakes. He watches other people and sees how it goes for them. And he learns all kinds of things that he will never do now because he learned from them not to do it. And Solomon's given us 10 things here. He's given us a great example of what not to look for life in. One, because you'll never have as much of as he had. And even if you did, it wouldn't be enough. Wise people learn from others. Here's what we mostly learn from others. We don't learn anything from others. We see other people make huge mistakes and we go follow them. We see other people do exactly what we shouldn't do and we go do it ourselves. Because we think we're better, we're different, we're special. It won't happen to us. It'll work out okay for us. We know, but we've all been building cisterns, every single one of us. And we've been putting in those cisterns what we think will give us life. Hopefully, most of us before this message have figured out that our cisterns leak. That those people and things do it for us until they don't. And eventually, they all don't. They're not enough. They fill us up, but we later find ourselves needing our cup filled again and again and again. Don't we? I invite you to come to Jesus, the living water. Not only can he fill our spiritual cistern, our soul, he can continue to fill it. He is a gushing reservoir. Nothing else can, and no one else can. This is why I'm starting here. Listen closely, we're through. If you don't become enough in yourself, no relationship will ever be. If you don't become enough in yourself, no relationship will ever be enough. Because in every relationship you're in it. And if you have an empty soul, what you're counting on is that person's going to fill it. And eventually you're going to find out he or she can't fill it. And then you're going to think they're bad people or they don't love me or something else, because if they were doing what they ought to do, I would be whole. They can't make you whole. They're not supposed to make you whole. If you don't understand that only Jesus can give you what your soul longs for, you'll expect parents, children, friends, dates, mates, money, things, trips, experiences, all those things do it for you. They're not supposed to. And eventually you'll discover that none of them can. The greatest commandments are about loving God most and others as ourselves. If I don't love God most, then I love you less. The more I love Betsy, the more I love God, the more capable I am of loving Betsy. The more I love God, the more capable I am of loving you. The more I love God, the more full my cup is. And if I have a full cup, I can be a giver. But if I have a half-empty cup or an empty cup, every relationship I'm in, the purpose of it is to try to get that cup filled, which makes me unable to really love people because I have to use them to try to be enough. I can become a pretty full cup that goes into a relationship to give, or I can become an empty cup in every relationship seeking to be filled.